Hello and welcome to Jep's Outdoor Adventures. I'm your host Jep. In today's video, we will be reading a story from Russel Annabel's book, Alaskan Adventures, The Early Years, specifically the myth of the Injun Devil. This is a story I read and I immediately knew I wanted to share it with you all. I think it's a very interesting story and I think Russel Annabel is a wonderful author. So, without any further ado, let's get right into it. Legends have branded the Wolverine as a cunning killer, more of a demon than a real animal. Here is the truth. It will give you one of the great surprises of your life. It was a festive, sub-zero February afternoon in Anchorage during the Alaskan city's boisterous annual fur rendezvous. My sourdough friend and colleague Starvation Smith performed a service for the wilderness-faring public in general, and in particular for all honest sportsmen, biologists, trappers, nature students, and outdoor editors. In one of radio's briefest broadcasts, he shattered a hoary precedent by blurting out a measure of unvarnished truth about the Wolverine. He thereby opened the door for others who may wish to do the same. Starvation and I were working through town on a great circle course and renewing acquaintances among the colorful trappers who were celebrating at various water holes along the main street. Along the way, we encountered a sidewalk reporter with a microphone. This lad, a breezy chichaco fresh up from the States, was buttonholing trappers at random and interviewing them over the air. To give Starvation his due, I don't believe he knew what the microphone was. Maybe he thought he had fallen into the hands of the temperance section of a kangaroo court. Anyway, he was sufficiently impressed to hold still.
Well, another trapper,
the radio guy gurgled as he queried Starvation about his name and occupation.
Perhaps you'll answer some questions for us, Mr. Smith. I suppose I should call you Starvation, so your friends will know who's speaking. Tell me, Starvation, what would you do if you discovered that a Wolverine devil was on your trap line?
A witch?
Muttered Starvation as he gazed wistfully down the street at a neon-trimmed door through which a procession of woodsmen was vanishing.
A devil. You know, a Wolverine devil. A savage, supernaturally cunning animal that has been the bane of so many northern trappers. What would you do now if you found that one of these destructive beasts had invaded your trapline?
Why, I'd catch the so-and-so and pelt him, of course,
Starvation growled. This quickly terminated the interview and won him undying fame among backwoods radio listeners from Point Barrow to Yakutat. Most of them, it later appeared, had burst into cheers at having at long last heard something sensible about a Wolverine. Although the fact seems to have been carefully overlooked, the hair-raising mythology of the Wolverine goes back straight as a gun barrel to the brave old days when the buckskin pioneers, for amusement, convinced a lot of tenderfeet that mountain rams made a practice of jumping off cliffs and landing safely on their horns, that grizzly bears hugged human victims to death, that hoop snakes rolled eerily about among the sunburnt hills of the west, and that porcupines threw their quills with the accuracy of Sioux arrows. Our fun-loving, trailblazing forebears decided the Wolverine was a sinister and malevolent little brute, a sort of wildlife outlaw, and consequently set about glamorizing him in the best American tradition, exactly as they glamorized their horse thieves, train robbers, two-gun killers, dance-hall harpies, and assorted frontier riffraff. When they went their way, they left today's sportsmen and nature writers such a legacy of wild and wonderful legend about the animal that it is small wonder the Wolverine of fact and the Wolverine of storybooks only vaguely resemble one another. You hear it stated as solemn truth that the Wolverine is such a bloodthirsty little brigand that even brown bears and the great gray timber wolves cringe at his approach. I recently read that the animal positively never retreats from combat, but continues to attack with grim, berserk ferocity until victory is his. In a tale by another bemused chap, there is the breathless information that the Wolverine is smarter than the fox and braver than the lion, that he can lift weights which two men could not budge, and that he has been known to kill polar bears and adult bull moose. Wow. After 100 years of that kind of purple prose about the critter, you can understand why mere mention of him throws otherwise intelligently critical persons into a psychic block. About all a yarn spinner has to do is lead off with the magic word, Wolverine, and his audience submissively relaxes as if loaded with nimbutal, and is ready to believe that the animal is a werewolf type of creature, blood brother to the loup-garou, and capable of any dreadful feat. It ought to be time now to plow at least a few of the old Wolverine tales under. They are getting pretty threadbare anyway. Bearing them might be a favor to a good many hard-working entertainers who can't keep them alive much longer. Actually, the Wolverine is the dead-end character of the wilds, an underprivileged beast, the product of hostile circumstances. He is an indomitable little varmint at whom nature pitched a fast curve. If he weren't tough, ornery, dour, unsociable, and tenacious, he would long since have vanished from the wildlife scene. Although he belongs to the marten family, his cousins are the mink, weasel, skunk, badger, and otter, He is bear-like in most of his tastes and habits. Therein lies his tragedy. In common with bears, he feeds on ground squirrels, mice, berries, green vegetation, carrion, spawned-out salmon, and such snowshoe rabbits as he finds crippled or daydreaming. He does all right in summer, but in the winter the going gets tough, because nature denied him the boon of hibernation. In late autumn, the bears look the food situation over, conclude it is a bad deal, and crawl into holes to sleep until spring. The bear-like little Wolverine, however, has to spend the next 7 months wrestling a living from a frozen, inhospitable wilderness. There are no salmon running in the streams, the berries and green vegetation are gone, the mice are under 5 feet of snow, and the ground squirrels are fast asleep in their deep, safe burrows. It is the season when Alaska shows its teeth and is a mean, ungenerous host to all save its highly specialized killers, among which little Guloluscus is not numbered. The Wolverine becomes a scavenger. Handicapped by short legs and a woeful lack of speed and agility, he forages through the deep snow at a lumbering gallop, covering enormous distances, yet managing to obtain only about 4 square meals a month. His reputation as a glutton derives from the fact that, on the rare occasions when he is lucky enough to find a quantity of food, he stuffs himself to the teeth, then fouls whatever food remains in the hope that other more powerful animals won't take it away from him. Anything that might possibly contain nourishment is banquet material to his indiscriminate taste and ironclad digestion. He will gulp down a roll of snowshoe babiche, a smoked, tanned dog harness, a frozen dish rag, or a year-old dried-out rabbit skin. Normally he shuns human habitation, but when his quest for food becomes especially desperate, he will occasionally break into and loot a woodsman's cabin or cache. The destruction he leaves behind him after these forays is spectacular, but not more so than that wreaked by the black bear. Moreover, the black bear raids cabins in the summer largely for the fun of it when other food is available. The Wolverine, however, almost invariably does his looting in winter to fend off starvation. As a fighting animal, the Wolverine is a willing but strictly second-rate performer. He is powerful, with unusual strength in his short jaws and heavily muscled forelegs, but his reaction time is slow. Among northern animals, it is speed that pays off. I have seen Wolverines whipped and put to flight by both dogs and coyotes, and seen them hastily give ground to bears. One winter, I witnessed a war between invading coyotes and a populous colony of Wolverines. The conflict was so one-sided in favor of the coyotes that it was practically no contest. This was at the headwaters of the Knik on the Chugach Mountains during the winter of 1932, when the coyotes first arrived here from Canada and were trying to get a foothold in the country. Wolverines in those days probably were more plentiful around the Knik than in any other area its size in the world. The uncommonly light snowfall there was greatly to their advantage, and they had a fine, inexhaustible source of food in the myriad salmon that were deposited by receding floods on the wide sandbars after the fish had spawned and died. Old Tex Cobb and I saw the animals patrolling the flats or digging into the frozen sand for salmon carcasses they had smelled out. We shot, trapped, and snared our share of them. They were our surefire cash for a crop. Instead of worrying about them being on our trapline, we hoped earnestly that they would remain and multiply. They didn't remain. The infiltrating army of coyotes also liked the Knik area, with its thin snowfall and plentiful supply of dead salmon. The coyotes got busy giving the Wolverines the heave-ho. The technique they employed was beautifully simple and efficient. They operated in pairs, and their teamwork was good. One coyote would tease a Wolverine into attacking, whereupon the other coyote would set about making hamburger of the Wolverine's unprotected backside. Time and again I saw Wolverines hazed off the bars. They foamed and squalled, and were forced to take refuge in the timber. If one of them ever drew blood from a coyote, I never saw evidence of it. We took a lot of Wolverines, whose rumps looked as if the animals had backed into a lawnmower, though. The Wolverines presently got the idea, and withdrew up into the foothills and stayed there. They just weren't built for fighting in fast company, and obviously they realized it. Today, Wolverine tracks on the Knik bars are practically as scarce as dinosaur tracks, but the place is overrun by coyotes. If the Wolverines had been 1/3 as dangerous in combat as they were reputed to be, nothing of the sort ever could have happened. Any sizable dog with brains enough to come in and out of the rain can handle a Wolverine with ease. Tex and I once had a big-mouthed, floppy-eared Chesapeake that made a career of finding and holding Wolverines for us. His name was Sport, and he had a system. If a Wolverine tried to flee from him, he would grab it by the rump and throw it. Through practice, he had learned to toss one end over end a good 10 feet. If the Wolverine charged him, he would prudently bound aside or retreat toward us. Meanwhile, he would keep up a clamorous bang to let us know he had another fur-bearer ready for the harvesting. As Sport possessed a set of teeth like a Malayan crocodile's, every time he took hold of a Wolverine he removed a chunk of flesh, a fact that soon discouraged the Wolverine from trying to get away from him. The only chance the animal had to avoid being dismembered a piece at a time was to back up to a boulder or windfall and stand its ground, which was precisely what Sport wanted. Old Sport didn't know that Wolverines were supposed to be able to defeat wolves and brown bears. But then, the Wolverines didn't know it either. As a result, all his life, until he was an old dog, he fought Wolverines every opportunity he got. When he passed on, he didn't have a single scar on him made by a Wolverine. Tex and I later had joint ownership in a hard-headed, spring-muscled Airedale Spaniel named Crab, who was, at least on one occasion, too efficient at mauling Wolverines. This happened one spring on Metal Creek, where we were pulling some lynx traps we had strung through the steep timberline meadows. A 40-foot-high snowslide had thundered down across the creek valley at one point. While we were looking for a route across the mass of snow and debris, we saw Wolverine lope along the summit and disappear into a hole. Knowing his pelt would still be prime, we hastened to the foot of the slide, stepped out of our snowshoe harnesses, and climbed toward the hole into which the animal had vanished. Our intention was to get as close as we could before the Wolverine heard us, then shoot him with our trapline pistols when he came out to investigate. It was a sound, practical plan, except that we neglected to take Crab's enthusiasm for Wolverines into our calculations. Partway up the slide, there was a steep, grassy incline with no footholds or handholds on it. We were inching our way up this difficult place, hanging on by prayer and surface tension, when the Wolverine suddenly began emerging hind end first from the hole. He was dragging the carcass of a yearling mountain goat that presumably had been killed by the slide and probably had started it. I suppose the Wolverine had located the carcass by scent and had excavated the hole down to it. Now he was pleasantly contemplating the reward for his industry. This would have been an excellent opportunity to kill the animal if only we could have figured out a way to free a hand and draw a gun without tobogganing off the slide. A moment or two later, while we were silently cussing ourselves for having gotten into such a jackpot, Crab appeared on the skyline behind the Wolverine. The Wolverine heard him and popped all the way out of the hole. He growled and showed his teeth. He was a big black Wolverine with reddish-brown stripes, about 40 pounds in weight. As the ugly, underslung brute advanced on Crab, Tex took a mean advantage of him. He suddenly let out a wild and threatening yell. Startled, the Wolverine spun around to face us, and Crab at once made capital of the diversion by setting his teeth solidly into the beast's fundament. I think Tex and I both realized at the same instant that uttering the yell had been a grievous tactical error, because Crab naturally had no intention of hanging onto the Wolverine and getting himself killed. Like his predecessors, Sport and the Knick Coyotes, his method was to give a Wolverine the hit-run treatment only. The moment he clamped his jaws on the rump of this one, he braced himself and tossed the raging animal over the brink of the slide and straight at Tex and me. Gravity was our only ally. We pushed off, slid, rolled, tumbled, and bounced some 30 feet down, over sundry ice ledges and cornices, to plummet with bone-rattling force into a big wet drift at the bottom. The Wolverine arrived a second later, and after him came Crab. Tex, lying on his back and half buried in the soupy snow with the wind knocked out of him, kicked with both feet at the Wolverine. But he missed and caught Crab in the ribs. I lurched to my feet, flailed at the animal with the snowshoe, and knocked him down. Crab seized him joyously and threw him at Tex. I made another wild swipe at him with the snowshoe and somehow hit Tex across the shins, which wrenched a bellow of agony from him. This could have gone on all afternoon if the Wolverine hadn't scuttled past me and taken up a defensive position under a splintered spruce. When I had dragged Crab away from the spot, Tex was at last able to draw his pistol and kill the animal. We got $15 for the pelt, and were lucky we didn't have to pay it out in doctor bills. While the Wolverine is no great shakes as a fighting animal, his vitality and iron staying power are incredible, almost beyond exaggeration. One winter, during a trapping expedition I made into the tall Keatnas with Starvation Smith, an old dog Wolverine rose virtually from the dead to give us a nightmarishly bad time. It was shortly after daybreak, on a bitter, wind-scoured morning when we came to a set we had made on the bank of a spring-fed creek that did not freeze. We found that a Wolverine had got into the trap and made off with it. The place looked as if a bulldozer had given it a once-over lightly. The Wolverine had torn all the bark off of Spruce Windfall, gnawed down frozen alders 3 inches thick, and mowed a wide swath through a thicket to the stream bank. Scouting downstream, we presently sighted the animal on a tiny bar in the middle of the creek. He had tried to reach the farther bank, but had been halted when the toggle pole to which the trap chain was fastened had fouled under a drift log. When he saw we had spotted him, he lunged to the end of the chain. With his eyes flaring in rage, he grunted and snarled at us with foam dripping from his flews. Starvation found some convenient stepping stones and made a successful hop, skip, and jump crossing to the bar. He shot the wolverine through the head with his .22 belt gun, took the beast out of the trap, slung him over his shoulder, and started back the way he had come. He was partly across, balancing himself on an ice-sheathed rock, when the wolverine abruptly snarled. The animal went vengefully to work with teeth and claws on the seat of Starvation's pants. Starvation howled like a bushwhacked wolf and fell off the rock into the creek. At the moment, he was probably the most confused and desperate sourdough in Alaska. If he had been alone, I don't know how he would have solved this problem without losing some skin and possibly his feet. He was afraid to let go of the wolverine's hind legs. He couldn't reach his holstered pistol with his left hand, and he had to do something about his feet in a hurry before they froze. Wild-eyed and cursing with vigor and variety, he came across the stream in a shower of spray and clawed his way up the snowy bank. "For God's sake, pry this varmint off of me," he pleaded hoarsely. I belted the wolverine behind the ears with the barrel of my pistol, then put the muzzle against the side of his head and fired. The animal bared his teeth in a final snarl, shuddered, and apparently died. For the next several minutes, Starvation and I were very busy trying to start a fire. There was no dry wood. The frozen alder twigs wouldn't burn, and the nearest dead spruce was 700 yards down the creek. Shivering uncontrollably, with the frost biting into the marrow of his bones, Starvation did some fast thinking and came up with a solution. He sat down and yanked off his frozen moccasins, then pulled the wolverine over to him and buried his stiffening feet into the soft, warm fur of the animal's belly. The need for haste passed. I snowshoed down the creek and brought back an armload of dead limbs and pieces of pitchy bark. With one of my webs, I shoveled the snow away from a likely spot and soon had a good fire burning. I was about to spread my parka for Starvation to sit on when there was a scuffling sound behind me, followed by another howl of dismay from Starvation. I turned to see him dashing barefoot through the snow with Wolverine clinging with teeth and claws to his pants leg. Starvation was trying to reach his rifle, which stood against a tree on the creek bank, but before he reached the gun he stumbled or was tripped by the Wolverine and pitched headfirst into a drift. I ran over to him, caught the Wolverine by the tail, and swung the critter against the tree with force enough to have splintered the skeleton of an ordinary beast his size. Still, the wheezing, bloody little horror refused to die. He crawled blindly through the snow and tried to snarl in defiance, until I picked up Starvation's .30-06 and blew the top of the creature's head off. In addition to the other punishment the Wolverine had taken, both .22 bullets apparently had penetrated his brain. I've seen a good many wild animals die in various parts of the earth, and some of them died hard, but I never saw one with a greater vitality or a grislier will to live than this Talkeetna Wolverine had. Not long ago, I came across a typical paragraph in which it was stated, without qualification, that the Wolverine stealthily shadows wolves and bears and takes their kills away from them. Now, any way you look at it, that would be quite a chore for the Wolverine, or any other member of our American fauna. Little Gulo luscus would have as much success shadowing one of the big, far-ranging Alaskan timber wolves as a hummingbird would have shadowing a jet plane. Even if he did manage it by a miracle, his efforts wouldn't reward him, because an animal incapable of holding his own against a dog or a pair of coyotes has no business fooling around with a timber wolf. A wolf could crush a Wolverine's skull with a single snap. He could break his back and cave in his ribs in the time it takes to light a cigarette. Peter Fruchin, the Arctic adventurer, records an instance in which a wolf killed a wolverine and received only a minor foot injury during the unequal fight. My opinion is that nobody ever saw a wolverine attempt to take a carcass away from an adult timber wolf in the wilds, and never will. I feel confident I am right in this because I know it is not in the nature of wild animals to deliberately commit suicide. As for the wolverine's ability to take a fresh kill away from a brown bear or a grizzly, this is a notion wholly in the never-never realm of pure fantasy. In a zoo with only a chunk of horse meat at stake, I suppose it could happen. But then only because, in common with his cousin the skunk, the wolverine has a perfume that other animals heartily dislike. In the wilds, however, with a moose or a caribou down, the great Alaskan bear is one of the most dangerous animals on Earth. I doubt that a lion or tiger could take meat away from him. Our bears weigh up to 1,800 pounds. They are active enough to catch a dodging ground squirrel. They can kill a moose with a single paw stroke and can overturn boulders that would make a tractor dig in its cleats and snort. Therefore, I maintain that the little bow-legged, button-eyed, 25-pound Wolverine would have to be a lot bigger and smell a lot worse before he could seriously hope to shove a hungry Alaskan bear around, no matter what his chroniclers claim. Tex Cobb and I once saw a brown bear and a wolverine meet at a winter-killed moose carcass, and the outcome was exactly what you would expect. The bear, a huge, high-shouldered, shaggy, coffee-colored brute, snorted like a horse when he got the wolverine's scent and without any hesitation, charged. The wolverine had been feeding gluttonously on the carcass, but took one appraising glance at the oncoming juggernaut and departed with epic speed. As a bully of brown bears, this particular wolverine was a first-class sprinter. Economically, the wolverine is a negative animal, not especially harmful in the wildlife setup, nor of any great value as a fur bearer. He kills a few mountain lambs, caribou fawns, and beavers, but is not even approximately as destructive as the wolf, the coyote, or even the fox. If he were 200 pounds heavier and 2 feet taller, he would be something to worry about. As he is, he rates as just another little meat-eater trying to get along in the world, and not doing an especially good job of it. Alaska has more wolverines than any other region, yet I have never heard of a wolverine having caused an Alaskan trapper to abandon his line. I have never heard a woodsman refer to a wolverine as a devil, except in jest. I've never heard a trapper complain that the wolverine is difficult to capture. When a trap-wise wolverine appears on a sourdough's line and makes a nuisance of himself, the old-timer will usually make a multi-trap set for the animal. This set is based on wolverine psychology and takes advantage of the animal's outstanding traits, his greediness for food and his high-voltage temper, and is invariably successful. You wire a large bait, a moose head is best, firmly in a rock crevice or in an angle between 2 tree roots so that the wolverine can get at it only from the front. Then you place a number of traps at the bait and in the approach to it. Don't cover the traps. Leave them in plain sight, for the wolverine will find them anyway. The animal may craftily ignore the bait for several days, but in the end his size and greediness for food will bring him back. He will pick his way cautiously through the field of traps and seize the bait. Finding it fastened down, he will yank at it until his temper flares and he forgets to watch his feet, after which he is your wolverine. The wolverine is circumpolar in distribution. In North America, he used to range through the northern tier of states and south along the Cascades and Rockies to California and Colorado. Today he is found chiefly in Alaska and Canada. His survival quotient is low. In fact, there are probably not more than 4,000 wolverines left in Alaska, which indicates that he may be the first of our land fur bearers to become extinct. Even if biological oblivion overtakes him, he will live on in legend. His fame is secure. The boys will be spinning big yarns about him when the wilderness is gone, and the last sourdough trapper has mushed over the ranges to the happy hunting grounds. Alright guys, so I think you can see exactly why I read that story. It is wonderful. His ability to write is nearly unparalleled. As Hemingway said, he's the best outdoor writer around. He is just amazing at helping immerse you into the atmosphere of the story. And, this really helps put into perspective a lot of different myths. Like he talked about hoop snakes. I mean, just think about that. I have a picture up on screen for you now. I mean, seriously? There's a reason why snakes slither around, so that they don't have to do stupid things like this. Come on now. Why would a snake do that? It makes no sense. But when someone tells you something with a straight face, you could believe it, especially when you don't have any experience out in the woods or, you've never lived in a certain area. If you've never been to the Southwest and you hear someone talking about hoop snakes, you might just believe it. And a lot of people have. I still see people talking about hoop snakes. And it's just such a ridiculous thing. It's incredible. And so I wanted to read this story for a few different reasons, just kind of showing how just because someone tells you something with a straight face doesn't mean that they are telling the truth. I have another YouTube channel called Idaho Bigfoot, and I know not everyone's interested in Bigfoot, and I understand that completely. That's why I keep the two channels separate, because one does not really work with the other, right? I want to keep things separate, right? But I had no idea that the wolverine wasn't like the honey badger is supposed to be, and I thought it gave other animals the middle finger and told them to get lost and took whatever it wanted, because that's what you hear all the time. But when you hear something like this, it really does put into perspective how, no, it isn't. And so when you hear stories about things, it's really good to make sure that you really investigate it thoroughly. You don't just discount it right away, but you really give a lot of thought and consideration to it. You really examine it. And, as someone who looks into Bigfoot a lot, that's incredibly important. I think everyone can see exactly why I say that. So, if that's something you're interested in, I have videos over there. I'll leave a link down below, but if not, I understand. But this kind of story is really important, I think, for a lot of people to help understand why it's important to really make sure that you aren't aggressive, but you do thoroughly research and ask questions of eyewitnesses or people who claim to have seen something, because just because they're an outdoorsman does not mean that they're reliable. I have met plenty of outdoorsmen who are reliable. Doesn't mean they all are. I mean, thinking about bighorn sheep jumping off ledges and landing on their horns is absurd. And you hear things like that, people joke, and sometimes it's hard to tell if they're joking. So using critical thinking, really trying to go over it, and trying to think the matter over, I think is important. And I think I learned a whole lot with this story, and this whole book, actually. It's near the end of the book. I've read almost the entire thing. It was loaned to me by a friend of mine. I'm just going to call him Pete. Thank you very much for loaning the book to me. Hopefully I'll be able to hold on to it for just a little bit longer, get another story or two out. I don't know. I've held on to it for a little while now. I'm a slow reader, but I do love reading these books. If you'd like to see this kind of video more often, let me know. I'd be happy to do that, especially when the weather's bad like it is kind of right now. It's not horrible, but it's not good enough to go out there onto the range and do some shooting. So if you guys want to see more videos like this on a more regular basis, you just let me know, guys. I'd love to do stuff like this. It's a little difficult because I have to transcribe everything from the book onto the screen, but honestly, if you guys like it, it's worth it. So just let me know. Let me know what you think about this story too. Have you read Russel Annabel before? I'd love to hear it, what you think about that. And please like, share, and subscribe. If you do subscribe, please feel free to hit the bell icon so you will be notified every time I come out with a new outdoor-themed video. But remember to share, because often these videos only get 100 views when it's something different than the usual, than the norm. So please share it to let everyone hear it and see it, and kind of help me get out there more. If you could, please. I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.